My 13-year-old niece destroyed her dying brother's final wish, and I'm still shaking. Kate called the family group chat at 8 a.m. Emergency family meeting. Kelsey destroyed Bobby's gaming setup. I drove over immediately. When I walked into my sister's house, $7,000 of equipment lay in pieces. Monitors, controllers. The full PC was just shattered. Bobby sat in his wheelchair sobbing while 8-year-old Kelsey stood in the carnage, holding her stepdad's gold club from the garage. Kelsey, what have you done? Grandma stumbled backward into the wall, her hand clutching her chest. Bobby is dying. This was his final wish. She's insane. Aunt Marie ripped the club from Kelsey's hands, shoving her backward into the wall, causing her to fall. She stood over my bed at 5 a.m. Bobby wheeled himself into the corner, pointing at Kelsey with shaking hands. Just staring at me with that crowbar. I begged her not to do it. I'm dying, and she destroyed my only happiness. Felony destruction of property. Stepdad Mark was already calling the police. We need someone here immediately. Kate grabbed Kelsey's shoulders and dragged her up. Apologize to your dying brother. Kelsey said nothing, just stood there blankly. She's a sociopath, Aunt Marie spat. Look at her face. No remorse. My entire pension, Grandma was crying. I gave everything for Bobby's last wish. 2 years of medical bills. Mark's voice broke. Watching our son fade away. And you do this? Uncle Tony stepped toward Kelsey. He has cancer. He's 11 and dying. Get her out of my sight. Grandma turned away. I can't even look at her. That's when Kelsey set the hammer down. She walked over and sat on the couch. Does anybody care why I did it? No, we don't care, Kate screamed. Your brother is dying. But I cared. I knelt beside her. Kelsey, tell me why you did it. Everyone groaned, but she looked around the room, then spoke clearly. Bobby has been torturing me for 2 years. How dare you? Marie started. He killed my hamster, Kelsey continued. Held it underwater in the bathroom sink while I screamed. Made me watch it stop moving. That hamster was your Christmas gift to me, Grandma. Grandma's face twitched. He burns my homework every Friday, so I fail tests. Mrs. Richards called home 6 times about missing assignments. Mom believed him and just said I was being careless. Bobby poured orange juice in my piano. The piano daddy left me before he died. He runs over my drawings with his wheelchair. He has terminal cancer, her stepdad roared. That's not an excuse, she shouted. He records me crying and plays it on Discord for his friends. They call me Crybaby Kelsey at school now. I told you at Thanksgiving, Uncle Tony. You said he won't be here next year. Let him have fun. I told you at Christmas, Grandma. You said be patient. He's dying. I told Aunt Marie at Easter when he killed the bunny you gave me. You said dying children act out sometimes. The room had gone quiet. People weren't meeting eyes anymore. Everybody in this family knew. Every one of you told me it's okay because Bobby is dying. Kelsey then stood up defiantly. But that's not why I destroyed it. Everyone froze. I found out yesterday. Mom left her laptop open. I was looking for my homework that Bobby deleted again. Kelsey pulled out her phone. But I found these bank transfers instead. From all of you. $40,000 total. For Bobby's medical expenses. Kate made a choking sound and instantly got defensive. Kelsey! Why were you going through my... She started storming to Kelsey, but I put my hand in front of her. Let her finish, I interrupted Kate. Her face was sickly pale. Kelsey continued. Grandma, your entire pension. Uncle Tony, your overtime. Aunt Marie, your second job. All of it going to this. She then swiped on her phone to another screenshot. First-class flights for 3. And a presidential suite at the Grand Floridian at Disney World. $8,000. For next month alone. All for my stepdad, my mom, and Bobby. Everyone gasped at once. That's not real! My sister made one last attempt, but this time it was Uncle Tony who stopped her. Next month, Bobby is supposed to be getting chemotherapy in Philadelphia. He roared at her. That's not. We can explain, Mark started. Then I found the group chat with the 3 of them. Kelsey held up the phone and read Bobby's message from yesterday. This wheelchair act is getting old. My legs are cramping from pretending. Mom's reply, just 6 more months, baby, then we'll have enough. Dad says, remember to cough during the family meeting Sunday and cry if anyone mentions Make-A-Wish. Bobby wrote, can't wait for Disney. These idiots actually think I'm dying. Especially Kelsey. She believes anything. Grandma's legs gave out. She collapsed into a chair. The room was silent as ever. Stand up, I said to Bobby, my voice deadly quiet. Uncle Jeff, I can't stand up. Now. Bobby looked at his parents. Kate was sobbing. Mark had gone gray. Then Bobby stood up and took 3 steps. Perfectly healthy. The explosion was instant. Aunt Marie screamed and lunged at Kate. Uncle Tony grabbed Mark by the throat. Grandma was praying in Italian, tears streaming, clutching her chest. 2 years! Grandma wailed. My husband died of real cancer. Real cancer. The equipment Kelsey destroyed, Grandma whispered, looking at the wreckage, was bought with our money. Bobby lunged for Kelsey's phone. Delete those screenshots. And that's when it happened. Remember that officer Mark had called earlier? He was here now, knocking on the door. Kate and Mark were about to have a whole lot of explaining to do. The door opened and a uniformed officer stepped inside, taking in the chaos with quick eyes. He immediately raised his hand for silence and called for backup on his radio. I grabbed Kelsey's small hand and pulled her toward the kitchen while the officer started separating everyone into different rooms. Grandma suddenly clutched her chest harder, and her legs gave out completely, dropping her into the nearest chair. The officer called for paramedics while Mark started yelling about pressing charges against Kelsey for destroying $7,000 worth of equipment. Bobby stood there frozen, probably realizing his wheelchair act was blown. Within minutes, 2 paramedics rushed through the door with their equipment and went straight to Grandma. The officer, whose badge said Bowles, started taking statements while his partner photographed all the broken gaming equipment scattered across the floor. Mark kept pointing at Kelsey and insisting she should be arrested for felony destruction of property. I quickly pulled out Kelsey's phone and showed Officer Bowles the screenshots she'd taken of the bank transfers and group chat messages. His eyebrows went up as he read through Bobby's messages about his legs cramping from pretending to be paralyzed. The officer called for an ambulance to properly check Grandma and radioed for a detective to handle what was clearly turning into a fraud investigation. He turned to Mark and said pressing charges against an 8-year-old for destroying property bought with stolen money wasn't going to happen. Kate started sobbing harder and begging everyone not to involve the police any further. I asked Kelsey to forward all the screenshots and bank records to my email while Officer Bowles watched and documented the timestamps on each one. Her hands shook as she typed, but she got them all sent while the paramedics carefully loaded Grandma onto a stretcher for observation at the hospital. Aunt Marie walked over to where we stood, still shaking from her earlier rage, and quietly told Kelsey she was sorry for shoving her into the wall. She admitted she should have listened when Kelsey told her about Bobby killing her Easter bunny. Uncle Tony just sat with his head in his hands, not saying anything at all. Officer Bowles explained that while he couldn't make arrests right now, He was opening a case for fraud and theft by deception. He also mentioned he'd need to file a report with Child Protective Services, given what had happened to Kelsey. Kate went pale and started arguing that CPS didn't need to be involved in a family matter. The officer pulled me aside near the hallway and strongly suggested Kelsey stay somewhere else for a few days while things got sorted out. Kate reluctantly agreed to let Kelsey come to my house for 48 hours, which Officer Bowles carefully documented in his notebook. Mark glared at me but kept his mouth shut. I went upstairs to pack a bag for Kelsey while she sat in my car, staring out the window without speaking a word. Once we were driving away from that house, I told her I believed everything she said and promised she was safe now. That's when she finally started crying for the first time since she'd destroyed the gaming setup. The tears just poured down her face as we drove through the quiet streets. That evening, after getting Kelsey settled on my couch with some hot chocolate, I called the hospital to check on Grandma. The nurse said she'd been discharged with instructions to rest and avoid stress for the next few days. When I got Grandma on the phone, she told me she should have seen the signs but didn't want to believe Kate could do something so cruel. Her voice sounded broken and old, nothing like the strong woman who'd raised us all. I set up my spare bedroom for Kelsey with fresh sheets and an extra blanket, since she liked to burrow under covers. Then I texted Kate some ground rules about contact with her daughter. No visits unless I was present, and all communication had to be documented going forward. She sent back angry messages about me turning her daughter against her and trying to steal Kelsey away. I saved every single text for the records. Kelsey came into the spare room and looked around at the space I'd prepared for her. She put her small bag on the bed and pulled out a stuffed rabbit that was missing an ear. I'm wondering why Kate and Mark thought they could pull off such a big lie for 2 whole years without anyone catching on. The way Bobby just stood up when I told him to makes me think he wasn't even trying that hard to keep. She told me it was the only toy Bobby hadn't destroyed yet because she kept it hidden in her school locker. I helped her put her few clothes in the dresser drawer and showed her where the bathroom was down the hall. She asked if she could have a glass of water on the nightstand in case she got thirsty at night. Such a simple request from a kid who'd been through hell for 2 years. I got her the water and a small snack in case she got hungry, then sat on the edge of the bed. She looked so small sitting there with her knees pulled up to her chest. I told her tomorrow we'd figure out the next steps, but tonight she just needed to rest and feel safe. She nodded and crawled under the covers, that damaged rabbit clutched tight in her arms. My phone started buzzing around midnight with texts from Uncle Tony, showing screenshots of every bank transfer he'd made to Kate over the past 2 years. The amounts made me sick to my stomach. 500 here, 800 there, all adding up to nearly $10,000 he'd worked overtime to earn. He kept apologizing in his messages, saying he should have asked for receipts or called the hospital directly, but he trusted his own family. I saved every screenshot to a folder on my laptop while Kelsey slept down the hall. Tony sent another message saying he felt like a coward for dismissing Kelsey's complaints at Thanksgiving when she tried to tell him about Bobby hurting her. I spent the next 3 hours making a timeline on a legal pad, writing down every incident Kelsey had mentioned about Bobby's abuse. The hamster drowning happened right after Christmas, according to what she'd said. The homework burning started in February and happened every single Friday. The piano got destroyed in March, 2 weeks after her dad's death anniversary. Each time she'd told an adult and each time they'd brushed her off because Bobby was supposedly dying. The pattern made me want to throw up. Around 3 a.m., Kelsey woke up and found me still working at the kitchen table. She sat down next to me and started telling me more about the hamster incident. Bobby had called her into the bathroom saying he wanted to show her something cool. When she got there, he was already holding her hamster over the sink full of water. She begged him to stop, but he just laughed and pushed it under while she screamed and tried to grab his arms. The hamster struggled for maybe 30 seconds before it went still. Kate came running when she heard the screaming, but Bobby told her Kelsey had accidentally dropped the hamster in the toilet and was being dramatic about a little accident. Kate believed him instantly and told Kelsey to stop crying over nothing. Kelsey went to her room and drew a picture of her hamster that she kept hidden in her school folder. She pulled out the drawing from her backpack and asked if we could frame it to remember him. The next morning, Officer Bowles called to let me know his report had been assigned to Detective Abel Brandt, who specialized in financial crimes. Within an hour, Detective Brandt called me directly, his voice sounding tired but interested. He said family fraud cases were more common than people realized and asked if I could bring all the evidence to the station that afternoon. He wanted to interview everyone involved but needed to see what we had first. While I was on the phone with him, I got a text from Kate saying a woman from Child Protective Services had just shown up at their house. I could hear panic in Detective Brandt's voice when I told him, saying CPS must have gotten the report from Officer Bowles already. About an hour later, I got a call from the CPS investigator, Marianne Boucher, who said she'd just left Kate and Mark's house. She described finding the destroyed gaming equipment still scattered across the living room floor and said Mark had been extremely defensive when she asked about the family dynamics. Kate had tried to minimize everything, claiming it was just a misunderstanding about medical bills, but Marianne said she'd seen enough red flags to open a full investigation. She needed to interview Kelsey within the next 48 hours at a child advocacy center. That afternoon, I drove to Grandma's house with my laptop and scanner to help her gather all her financial records. Her hands shook as she pulled out folder after folder of bank statements showing withdrawals from her pension account. We scanned every single receipt and withdrawal slip, the total coming to $14,800. She kept stopping to cry, saying her husband had died of real stomach cancer 5 years ago, and this felt like someone was spitting on his grave. She showed me pictures of him during his actual chemo treatments, bald and skinny and clearly suffering, nothing like Bobby's healthy appearance. She said she'd given Kate everything because she couldn't bear the thought of another grandchild going through what her husband did. While we were scanning documents, Uncle Tony called from his construction site during his lunch break. He couldn't stop thinking about all the times Kelsey had tried to tell him something was wrong. He remembered Thanksgiving specifically when she'd shown him bruises on her arm and said Bobby had grabbed her hard enough to leave marks. He'd told her dying kids act out sometimes and to be patient because Bobby wouldn't be here next year. Now he wanted to write a formal statement for the detective about everything he'd witnessed and ignored. 2 days later, Detective Brandt called to update me on his progress. He'd already drafted subpoenas for the airline records showing the Disney trip reservations and was working on getting the medical records from the hospital Kate claimed was treating Bobby. He said once you start pulling threads in cases like this, everything unravels fast, but he warned me the legal process could take months to fully resolve. He seemed confident though, especially after seeing the screenshots of the family group chat where they'd openly discussed their scam. The assistant district attorney, Lena Boswell, called me the next morning saying Detective Brandt had briefed her on the case. She wanted to make sure everything was done properly to avoid any procedural issues that could let Kate and Mark escape consequences. She was particularly interested in the screenshots showing the three of them planning their lies and said that kind of evidence was gold for proving conspiracy. She recommended we gather every piece of documentation before moving forward with arrests. That evening, Kelsey and I sat at my laptop going through her phone for more evidence. She showed me Discord recordings where Bobby's voice could be heard clearly laughing with his friends about making her cry. They called her Crybaby Kelsey and made jokes about her reactions to his pranks. She had photos of her homework assignments burned and charred in the backyard fire pit. She had a video of her piano with orange juice dripping out of the keys. She'd been collecting evidence for months without even realizing it, just trying to show someone, anyone, that she wasn't making it up. I grabbed my phone and called the children's hospital Kate had mentioned during family dinners. The receptionist transferred me to pediatric oncology, where a nurse picked up after 3 rings. I explained I was calling about my nephew Bobby's treatment records for a family emergency. She went quiet for a moment, then told me privacy laws meant she couldn't confirm or deny any patient information. She suggested having law enforcement make the request through proper channels since they had the authority. I thanked her and hung up, frustrated but understanding they had rules to follow. Meanwhile, Marianne from CPS showed up at Kate and Mark's house for an interview about the whole situation. Kate opened the door looking like she hadn't slept, her eyes red and puffy. Marianne sat them down in the living room and started asking questions about Bobby's diagnosis. First, Kate said Bobby had been misdiagnosed by an inexperienced doctor who confused symptoms. Then she changed her story and claimed they were seeking experimental treatment not covered by insurance. When Marianne pressed for specifics, Mark jumped in saying it was all a big misunderstanding about payment plans. Marianne wrote down every contradiction in her notebook, her pen moving fast across the pages. At the same school where Kelsey attended, Daisy Bowden, the counselor, started pulling attendance records and grade reports. She spread them across her desk and finally saw the pattern Kelsey had mentioned. Every single Friday for the past year showed missing homework assignments in multiple classes. The grades would drop, then Kelsey would work hard to catch up, only to fail again the next Friday. Daisy compared this to the dates when Kelsey had reported problems at home to various teachers. The correlation was perfect, and Daisy felt sick to her stomach for not connecting these dots sooner. She started preparing a detailed report showing how Kelsey's academic performance tanked whenever she tried to get help. That evening, my phone buzzed with a voice message from Grandma that was half Italian, half English. Her voice cracked as she talked about her husband Antonio and how he'd suffered through real chemo. She described watching him lose his hair, throw up for hours, and waste away to nothing. She said she was ashamed for using his memory to guilt Kelsey into being patient with Bobby. She wanted to make things right but didn't know where to start and kept switching between languages. Detective Brandt called me the next morning with an update on his investigation. The airline had sent over the records he'd subpoenaed showing 3 first-class tickets to Orlando. The names on the reservation were Kate, Mark, and Bobby, scheduled for next month. The Disney resort booking showed a presidential suite at the Grand Floridian for a full week. The total came to over $8,000, all paid with a credit card in Kate's name. Kelsey kept evidence of Bobby's abuse for months. While everyone dismissed her, the Discord recordings, burned homework photos, and that piano video, she was building a case without even knowing it, just desperately trying to get someone to believe her reality. He added these documents to his growing evidence file and said things were moving fast. 2 days later, the Children's Hospital finally responded to Detective Brandt's official request for medical records. They confirmed they had no oncology file for Bobby, no chemotherapy appointments, no cancer diagnosis at all. His medical records showed only routine pediatric visits for normal kid stuff like strep throat and ear infections. His last visit was 6 months ago for strep, and he'd been prescribed antibiotics. Detective Brandt called this the smoking gun he needed to prove the whole cancer story was fake. That afternoon, Mark called my cell while I was making Kelsey lunch at my apartment. He started rambling about how they were just exploring second opinions, and everyone was overreacting to a misunderstanding. I told him I was recording the call since that's legal in our state without his consent. He immediately got defensive and started yelling that I was trying to trap him. He claimed they never meant for things to go this far, and it started as a small lie. I asked him to explain the Disney tickets, and he hung up on me without answering. Later that day, one of Kelsey's classmates sent her screenshots from Bobby's Discord server. Bobby had posted about how his family were haters and how he'd almost gotten caught but pulled it off. He bragged about fooling everyone for 2 years and said he deserved an Oscar for his performance. He even joked about practicing his wheelchair routine and complained about having to fake cough all the time. The kid who sent the screenshots said Bobby didn't realize his posts could be used as evidence against him. A DA, Lena Boswell, reviewed all the evidence Detective Brandt had gathered and started drafting preliminary charges. She listed theft by deception for the $40,000 stolen from family members. She added conspiracy to commit fraud since all 3 of them planned it together. She also included child cruelty charges for what they'd put Kelsey through for 2 years. She noted in her file that Kelsey's destruction of the gaming equipment wouldn't result in charges. Since the equipment was bought with stolen money, it wasn't really Bobby's property to begin with. She wanted to move carefully, but make sure the charges would stick in court. CPS held a meeting and created a formal safety plan for Kelsey's living situation. They determined she would stay with me temporarily while the investigation and legal proceedings continued. Kate would only get supervised visits at the CPS office with a social worker present. Mark wouldn't be allowed any contact with Kelsey at all given his aggressive behavior. Kelsey seemed relieved when Marianne explained the plan, but her face fell when she realized she couldn't see her mom normally. It was complicated for an 8-year-old to process that her mom had done something so wrong. That first weekend, I took Kelsey to Target and let her pick out stuff for her new room at my place. She grabbed a purple nightlight shaped like a butterfly and spent 20 minutes testing every single one on the shelf to find the brightest. We bought shelves for her drawings and she arranged them by color while I made pancakes Saturday morning. She ate 3 bites, then stopped and looked at me like she was waiting for something bad to happen. I told her she could eat as much or as little as she wanted, and she relaxed enough to finish half the stack. Sunday morning, she woke up screaming from a nightmare, and it took an hour to calm her down. My phone was blowing up with family group chat messages the whole time. Aunt Marie wrote paragraph after paragraph about how sorry she was for not listening to Kelsey at Easter when Bobby killed that bunny. Uncle Tony sent me screenshots of his bank transfers to Kate with angry emojis and said he felt like the world's biggest fool. Kate kept sending voice messages crying and saying we were all overreacting, and then switching to screaming that I kidnapped her daughter. I muted the chat but took screenshots of everything for the lawyer I knew I'd need. Monday morning, I called Kelsey's school school and asked to speak with the counselor about what was happening. Daisy Bowden set up weekly sessions for Kelsey starting that Wednesday and made notes in her file that she was going through family trauma. She talked to all of Kelsey's teachers privately and told them to give her extra time on assignments without making a big deal about it. Kelsey came home from the school that first day and said Mrs. Richards actually smiled at her and asked if she was okay. Marianne from CPS called Tuesday and said Kelsey needed to do a formal interview at the Child Advocacy Center downtown. She explained they had special rooms with cameras where trained people would talk to Kelsey about everything that happened. She said I could watch from another room but couldn't be in there with her. The interview was scheduled for Thursday, and Marianne spent an hour on the phone walking us through what would happen so Kelsey wouldn't be scared. Detective Brandt started calling family members for official statements that same week. He interviewed Grandma first at her house, and she showed him every receipt she'd saved from giving Kate money. She cried through the whole thing and kept saying she should have asked for medical records but trusted her own daughter. Aunt Marie met him at the police station and brought printed emails where Kate described Bobby's treatments in detail. Uncle Tony gave his statement over lunch break at his job and admitted he'd worked 60-hour weeks for 6 months to help pay for fake chemo. The detective told me later that all three of them looked broken when they realized how long the lie had been going on. Thursday morning, Detective Brandt called with news that made my stomach drop. Someone had tipped him off that Kate contacted Make-A-Wish Foundation 3 months ago about getting Bobby a Disney trip. The charity confirmed they had an application on file claiming Bobby had terminal leukemia with 6 months to live. They hadn't processed it yet because they were waiting for medical documentation that Kate kept saying was coming. This showed she wasn't just scamming family, but was ready to steal from dying kids too. That afternoon while I was at work, Kelsey texted me from the school saying she found something important on her phone. When I picked her up, she played me an audio recording from last month where Bobby was practicing his sick kid act. You could hear Kate in the background telling him to cough more and sound weaker. She coached him on what to say if anyone asked about his treatments. Bobby kept laughing and saying this was better than theater class. The detective called it the best evidence he'd seen in 20 years of fraud cases. Friday night around 9, someone started pounding on my front door so hard, the whole frame shook. Mark was outside screaming that I had no right to keep his wife's daughter from her. I grabbed Kelsey and took her to the back bedroom, locked the door, and called 911. I stayed on the phone with the operator while Mark kept pounding and yelling threats about what he'd do if I didn't open up. The police took 12 minutes to arrive, but Mark was still there kicking my door when they pulled up. They arrested him for criminal threats and disturbing the peace while Kelsey watched through the bedroom window. The next Monday, I went to the courthouse to file for a protective order against Mark and request emergency custody of Kelsey. The magistrate read through the police reports and CPS documents and granted a temporary order right there. Mark had to stay 500 feet away from both of us, and Kate could only see Kelsey at the CPS office with supervision. The judge looked disgusted when he read about the fake cancer scheme, but stayed professional. 2 days later, CPS filed their official neglect petition with the family court. They created a whole case plan that Kate had to follow to get Kelsey back. She had to complete 12 weeks of parenting classes, attend individual therapy twice a week, and pass random drug tests, even though drugs weren't part of the case. They also ordered Bobby to get psychological evaluation and weekly counseling to deal with whatever made him think torturing his sister was okay. Marianne said the system was finally taking it seriously because of all the evidence we had. The next morning, Daisy called me from the school to talk about how to handle things with the other kids since word was spreading fast about Bobby's fake cancer. She set up a class meeting about honesty and trust without using any names, but everyone knew what it was really about. She made sure the other kids didn't start bullying Bobby, even though what he did was wrong, because 2 wrongs don't make a right. She also pulled Kelsey aside during lunch to tell her that what happened to her was real and that the adults should have listened better. 3 days later, Kate texted me asking if we could meet alone at the coffee shop near my work to talk about everything. I brought my phone to record and told her right away that I was recording, which was legal in our state, and she said that was fine. She sat there picking at her napkin and admitted she knew it was wrong from the start, but they were drowning in bills after Mark lost his job last year. She said it started with just asking Grandma for help with 1 month's rent, and then people kept offering more money and the lie got bigger and bigger. She told me they never meant for it to go on this long, but once Bobby was in on it, they couldn't figure out how to stop without destroying everything. I didn't offer any forgiveness because that wasn't mine to give, and told her she needed to earn it from Kelsey and everyone she stole from. The next week, Boswell called me to say she was offering Kate and Mark a plea deal where they'd plead guilty to fraud and attempted charity fraud. In exchange, they'd get 5 years probation, have to pay back every penny, do 200 hours of community service each, and complete mandatory counseling. Mark's story keeps changing. First, it's a misunderstanding, then a small lie that got out of control. The timing of that Make-A-Wish application makes me wonder if Kate was planning even bigger scams while crying poverty to her family. She said no charges would be filed against Kelsey for breaking the gaming stuff since it was bought with stolen money anyway. They had 7 days to decide if they wanted to take the deal or go to trial where they could face actual jail time. Meanwhile, Grandma met with a financial counselor at the community center who helped her figure out how bad things really were. She'd given Kate almost her entire pension savings and would have to go back to work at 72 years old just to pay her basic bills. The counselor helped her apply for a part-time job at the library and set up a strict budget so she could slowly rebuild her savings. Grandma told me she was determined to move forward instead of sitting around feeling sorry for herself, even though this was the hardest thing she'd faced since Grandpa died. Detective Brandt sent me a copy of his final report, which officially stated that the gaming equipment wasn't really Bobby's property since it was purchased with money obtained through fraud. This meant Kelsey destroying it wasn't a crime, and nobody could press charges against her even if they wanted to. He wrote that in his 20 years of investigating fraud, he'd rarely seen such clear evidence, and that the family was lucky Kelsey had documented everything so well. I spent the next 2 weeks working with Marianne to get ready for the family court hearing by organizing all the witness statements and evidence into a binder. Kelsey practiced what she would say if the judge wanted to hear from her, even though kids her age usually don't have to testify. She was nervous, but kept saying she wanted to tell her truth to someone official who would actually listen this time. Bobby's therapist made him write an apology letter to Kelsey as part of his treatment, but when it arrived, it was only 3 sentences long and didn't sound sorry at all. The therapist included a note saying Bobby was struggling to accept responsibility and understand how his actions hurt others, but they were working on it. Kelsey read the letter once, handed it back to me, and asked me to put it somewhere she wouldn't have to see it again. 2 weeks after that, Kate and Mark showed up at the courthouse to accept the plea deal looking like they hadn't slept in days. The judge read out all the charges and asked if they understood what they were agreeing to, and they both said yes. Kate cried through the entire thing while Mark just stood there with his jaw clenched, looking mad at the world. The judge ordered them to pay back $38,000 in restitution to all the family members they'd stolen from. They'd have to make monthly payments for the next 10 years, along with completing their community service at a local food bank. The judge also banned them from creating any fundraising campaigns or charity requests for the rest of their lives. Right after court, Marianne filed paperwork to extend Kelsey's safety plan through the whole summer, since Kate needed to complete at least half her required parenting classes and therapy before they'd even consider letting her see Kelsey without supervision. The plan said Kelsey would stay with me, and Kate could have supervised visits at the CPS office once a week if Kelsey felt comfortable with it. Kelsey seemed relieved when Marianne explained she had at least 3 more months before anything would change, and maybe longer if she didn't feel ready. That same afternoon, Aunt Marie showed up at my door with an envelope and asked if she could talk to Kelsey for just a minute. She got down on her knees in front of Kelsey and apologized again for shoving her that day and not believing her all those times she asked for help. She said she'd been so focused on Bobby being sick that she ignored a real child who was really hurting right in front of her. The envelope had a check for $500 to help pay for some of Kelsey's therapy sessions as her way of trying to make things right. She told Kelsey she didn't expect forgiveness, but wanted her to know that she finally understood how badly all the adults had failed her. The next morning, Daisy called me from the school to say she'd been tracking Kelsey's attendance since she started living with me, and the difference was huge. She showed me the charts when I picked Kelsey up that afternoon, pointing to how she'd missed 23 days in the past semester, but only 1 day since moving in with me. She'd already talked to Kelsey's teachers about creating a catch-up plan that wouldn't stress her out too much. Each teacher agreed to let Kelsey turn in 1 missing assignment per week until she was caught up, and they'd grade them for partial credit instead of zeros. Mrs. Richards even offered to stay after school on Tuesdays to help Kelsey with math, since Bobby had burned so many of her homework sheets. Within 2 weeks, Kelsey's grades started climbing back up, and her teachers kept emailing me about how she was raising her hand in class and actually talking to other kids at lunch. About a week after that, Uncle Tony showed up at my door carrying a big cardboard box, while Aunt Marie stood behind him holding an envelope. They'd gone to 3 different music stores looking for a used keyboard that wasn't too expensive but still worked properly. The one they found was a Yamaha with 61 keys, and it came with a stand and a bench. Tony set it up in Kelsey's room, while Marie explained they weren't trying to buy forgiveness. They just wanted to replace what Bobby had destroyed. Kelsey sat down at the keyboard and pressed a few keys, then slowly picked out the notes to Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star from memory. When she finished the song, she turned around with the first real smile I'd seen from her in weeks. The therapy session started the following Monday with a child psychologist who worked specifically with kids who'd been through trauma. Kelsey didn't want to talk at first, so the therapist gave her paper and crayons instead. She drew picture after picture of her hamster, using every shade of brown and gray to get the fur just right. Then she drew Bobby holding it underwater while she stood there crying. The therapist didn't push her to talk about it, just let her draw, and nodded when Kelsey finally said she felt mad and scared at the same time. After the session, the therapist told me it was good that Kelsey was expressing these feelings instead of keeping them locked inside. Meanwhile, Grandma had started going to a support group at the senior center for people who'd been victims of fraud. She called me after her 3rd meeting to say she'd stopped beating herself up about being too trusting. The group leader helped her see that con artists specifically target family members because they know people want to help their loved ones. She was learning to focus on rebuilding her finances instead of drowning in guilt about losing her pension. Detective Brandt called me about a month later to say he was officially closing the active investigation. Kate and Mark had made their first restitution payment of $800 that would be split among all the family members they'd stolen from. They were also showing up to their required therapy sessions every week and had started their community service at the food bank. The legal system had done what it could do, and now it was just about them following through with the plea agreement. A few days after that, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. The woman on the other end said she was a reporter from the local paper and had heard about our family's situation through court records. She wanted to interview me about what happened, maybe get some photos of Kelsey for a human interest piece. I told her absolutely not, that an 8-year-old girl's privacy was more important than any news story. She tried to convince me it might help other families recognize the signs of fraud, but I held firm. She finally agreed not to pursue the story and thanked me for my time. 3 months had passed since that terrible morning at Kate's house when everything came out. The counselor at CPS arranged for Kelsey and Bobby to have a supervised meeting to see if they could start working through what happened. Bobby sat on one side of the room with his therapist, while Kelsey sat on the other side with hers. The counselor explained the rules about respectful communication and asked Bobby if he had anything he wanted to say. Bobby looked at the floor and mumbled that he knew he'd hurt Kelsey, and he was sorry. Kelsey listened but didn't say anything back. After about 20 minutes, she told the counselor she wanted to leave. Everyone respected her choice, and nobody pushed her to stay longer or forgive Bobby. The counselor said it was important for Kelsey to have control over these interactions after having no control for so long. Kate had been working hard to meet all the court requirements and sent proof that she'd completed half of her parenting classes. She also wrote Kelsey a 3-page letter that Marianne delivered to me. In the letter, Kate took responsibility for not protecting Kelsey from Bobby's abuse and for being so focused on money that she ignored her daughter's pain. She wrote that she understood if Kelsey never forgave her, but she hoped someday they could have a relationship again. She didn't demand anything or try to guilt Kelsey, just acknowledged the harm she'd caused. Kelsey read the letter once, handed it back to me, and asked me to put it in a drawer where she wouldn't have to see it every day. 2 weeks later, we drove to the CPS office for Kelsey's first supervised visit with Kate. They had a small room with toys and books where they could spend an hour together while a social worker observed. Everything started okay, with Kate asking about school and Kelsey's new keyboard. But then Kate started crying and saying how much she missed Kelsey, how the house felt empty without her. Kelsey stood up and told the supervisor she wanted to leave. The supervisor immediately ended the visit and walked Kelsey out to me. Detective Brandt just happens to write that Kelsey documented everything perfectly, 20 years of experience, and this is somehow one of his clearest cases. Something about the timing of all these apologies and payments feels really convenient, right, when everyone's facing legal consequences. She made notes in her file that Kelsey had appropriately advocated for herself when she felt uncomfortable. Finally, the 4-month review hearing arrived at the courthouse. The judge read through all the reports from CPS, parents, the therapists, and Daisy from the school. Marianne testified that Kelsey was thriving in my care and recommended she stay with me through the rest of the school year. The judge asked about Kate's progress and heard that she was complying with all requirements, but still had work to do in therapy. The judge approved the plan for Kelsey to stay with me with a gradual schedule for Kate to earn back unsupervised visits if she continued therapy and respected Kelsey's boundaries. After court, Kelsey and I went for ice cream, and she told me she felt safe knowing she didn't have to go back yet. 2 days after court, Uncle Tony started a new family group chat on his phone and added everyone except Mark. He typed out rules at the top about listening to kids when they say something's wrong and pinned Aunt Marie's apology message where she admitted she should have believed Kelsey about the bunny. Nobody really talked in it for the first week except to share photos of food or weather updates. I saw the community center had free art classes starting and filled out all the scholarship forms for Kelsey while she watched me check every box. The lady at the desk stamped the papers and handed us a supply list that the program would cover completely. Kelsey picked a purple folder for her art supplies and spent 20 minutes choosing between different sketch pads at the store. Her first class was on a Tuesday, and she came home with charcoal all over her hands, showing me how to shade a sphere. Kate kept making her monthly payments to everyone, and Grandma told me she'd gotten back about $5,000 so far. Grandma found a job at the library 3 days a week, checking in books and helping with the children's reading program. She sent Kelsey a photo of herself wearing the library name tag. Bobby's therapist called me to say he'd written another apology letter and asked if Kelsey wanted to receive it. I asked Kelsey and she said yes, so the therapist mailed it to our house. This one was 3 pages long, and Bobby wrote about understanding how scared Kelsey must have been when he killed her hamster and how wrong it was to call her names at the school. His handwriting was messy, but he'd clearly tried to explain each thing he'd done wrong. Kelsey read it twice, then put it in her desk drawer with the other one. The supervised visits at CPS had been going okay, so Marianne approved Kate's request for an unsupervised visit at the park. I drove Kelsey there on a Saturday morning, and Kate was already waiting on a bench with a bag of bread for the ducks. They walked to the pond together while I sat in my car where I could see them, but not hear what they said. Kelsey showed Kate her art folder, and Kate looked through each drawing carefully. After exactly 2 hours, Kelsey walked back to my car, and Kate waved from the bench. In the car, Kelsey told me they'd talked about her art class and which teacher she liked at the school, but Kate hadn't cried or asked her to come home. 4 months had passed since that morning when everything exploded, and our family worked differently now. Uncle Tony called me every week to check on Kelsey and sent her Amazon gift cards for art supplies. Aunt Marie brought casseroles to my house and left them on the porch with notes saying she didn't need to come in, just wanted to help. Grandma had paid off her credit cards with the restitution money and moved to a smaller apartment near the library where she worked. Kate and Mark both worked extra shifts at their jobs to keep making the monthly payments while doing their community service on weekends. Mark cleaned graffiti off buildings, and Kate sorted donations at the food bank. The prosecutor said they were meeting all their requirements and staying out of trouble. Everyone who'd given money for the fake medical bills had gotten back, at least some of it, and would eventually get it all if Kate and Mark kept working. Bobby went to counseling every week, and his therapist said he was starting to understand why what he did hurt people. He joined a youth group at the community center where they did volunteer work and learned about empathy. The therapist thought maybe in a year Bobby and Kelsey could try talking again if Kelsey wanted to. On a regular Thursday morning, Kelsey sat at my kitchen table drawing in her new sketchbook while humming a song from her music class. She'd drawn a tree with birds in it and was adding leaves one by one with her colored pencils. Her cereal bowl sat half empty beside her, and she'd already packed her school bag for the day. She looked up at me and asked if I could sign a permission slip for a field trip to the art museum next month. I signed it and gave her lunch money, and she went back to drawing her tree. She didn't talk about forgiveness or healing or any big ideas like that. She just drew her pictures and went to the school and played with the neighbor's cat and did normal kid stuff. That was what mattered most. She felt safe enough to just be 8 years old. Thanks for sticking around and wondering through all this with me today. Really cool to explore it all together. I'll catch you in the next one. And hey, subscribe for more content like this.